Working together to make a better community. We can create a brighter day.
Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guests today are David Newbury and Catherine Boivin-Girard, both from out of town, and welcome both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I understand you're both here for an Injured Worker Outreach Forum taking place in town here. This is October 3rd and 4th.
Mm-hmm.
But Catherine, let's start with you.
Yes.
Where are you coming from, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here today. I'm an injured worker for Advocacy North. I'm located in Timmins. I graduated from law school in 2012. And actually my first file was a WSIB file. So I've been doing WSIB for quite some time, actually almost 6 years. And so I'm a little bit familiar with the system and what the injured workers go through, which is, it's not fun. I started in my position in February 2012, which is the injured workers lawyer for Advocacy North, which is a collaborative project that was created through legal aid. So
this was last year? Or?
I started in February 2017.
Okay.
Sorry, 18. Sorry, time goes by
This
really
year.
fast.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so you've been on the job for about 6-8 months.
That's right. So since I started in my position, I've been traveling a lot, going to different communities. Our project, we have to take care of 11 northern clinics. So it goes all the way to Thunder Bay, Fort Francis, Moosonee, Kapuskasing. So we have to cover quite an area. So right now we're still visiting the clinics. We have about 4 or 5 left to do. And I'm actually in Thunder Bay these next couple of days for an injured workers event, which is happening tonight. Yes.
So you were mentioning, so this is part of the community legal clinics.
Yes.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about that? What are those clinics?
So you want me to say all the 11 northern clinics?
You don't have to say the names, but what is their function and how does it work?
Well, each clinic, usually they do ODSP, they do criminal injuries, ODSP is Ontario Disability Benefits, criminal injuries, landlord-tenant board matters, criminal injuries compensation board matters. But most of them don't do workers' compensation. So that's where I come in. I'm trying to get the clinics to start doing WSIB again. Because a lot of the clinics, when Mike Harris took over, they didn't have time to do workers' comp. ODSP took precedence. And so now my job is to try and get these clinics to start doing workers' comp again.
And
Yes.
so the clinics offer free legal advice
Yes,
to folks on low income
that's right.
all across the province.
That's right.
And so you're based in Timmins
Yes,
and providing service to all the ones in Northern Ontario, 11 different clinics.
that's right. Yes.
And David, you also work for a community legal clinic.
Yes, I work in Toronto for a clinic called Injured Workers Community Legal Clinic, and that's been there, I think, since the late 60s. It was one of the first community legal clinics to operate in the province, and is still going, providing advice and representation to injured workers throughout Ontario, free of charge.
And so how many people work with the Injured Workers Community Legal Clinic?
There's about 10 of us. And there's a mix of lawyers and what's called community legal workers, which is what I do, which is people that are specifically trained in representing people through the workers' compensation process, but who maybe didn't go to law school.
So Catherine, now we're just hearing you're the one lawyer representing all in Northern Ontario, and David works for a clinic with 10 people in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
So explain again, like how do you meet the demand in the north?
Oh, it's gonna be a challenge, absolutely. So my goal, like I said, I'm trying to get other clinics to start doing WSIB. A lot of private lawyers don't do WSIB because there's not a lot of money to be made, unfortunately. So my goal is to try and get more clinics to do WSIB, especially in Northern Ontario. It's going to be a challenge. It would be nice to see the clinics hiring more WSIB lawyers right off like when they start off, because it's hard for clinics to start doing workers' comp if they've been doing a certain area of law for like 10, 20 years. So it's going to be a challenge, absolutely. Yes.
And David, so are you originally from Toronto? Where did you grow up?
I grew up, north of Toronto, in a little town called Sutton on Lake Simcoe. But I spent my early 20s in Toronto, and then a number of years as well out west in Vancouver and around there.
So you both deal with injured workers who have an active claim, I guess, with the WSIB.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about the experience or the challenges that some of the workers face that you deal with. Catherine, why don't you start?
Some of the issues that they face, the injured workers, is they have old claims. They've had a lot of representations throughout the years, and there's been a lot of things that were missed, unfortunately. Some deadlines, some way the earnings was calculated. So when you get a file, you have to make sure that you really read the file thoroughly, and some of the files can be quite extensive. So it's just a lot of time and effort to go through a file. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and to make sure that they don't miss any deadlines, to make sure that they, as soon as someone is injured, that they file a claim, or they tell the WSIB and the employer that they were injured. Sometimes that doesn't happen, so we have to deal with working around, finding a way to work around the time limit to file a claim.
So this is it mostly people who have had a serious injury that stays with them for the rest of their life that you're trying to sort out?
Yes.
How they interact with WSIB?
Yeah, or the injury over time has gotten worse, so you're trying to get more compensation for them. Another issue I see is when someone has had a back injury, there'll be a pre-existing, like a DDD, degenerative disc disease. So the WSIB will try and say, well, that's a pre-existing condition. That's not related to the work injury. So WSIB will find something that's pre-existing, so they can get away with not paying the full amount, or try to reduce the amount. Yeah.
And David, so you also represent injured workers. Do you have similar experiences, or what kind of challenges do people face that are coming to see you for help?
Well, I mean, a whole number of them. So the system itself, I think, often works quite well for the types of injuries that show up on an X-ray and heal on a normal time schedule. So the WSIB serves people who break an arm and who need 4 weeks or 16 weeks or whatever to get back to work. But when some of these injuries start to develop into more complex injuries, oftentimes if there's a traumatic physical injury, there can be a psychological component that comes out of it. Or if injuries are more severe and more complex and they kind of develop over time, that's where it can become more difficult for workers. Repetitive strain injury is another one. It doesn't show up well in a picture. So injured workers have to work very hard to demonstrate that not only do they have a condition, but that this condition was caused by the work that they were doing. And I find very often the kind of first level of interaction with the WSIB, there's not adequate investigation of people's jobs. There's often just phoning the employer and asking them about the job description.
We need to hold on right there.
Yeah, okay.
We need to take a short break.
Sorry.
Please stay with us, and we're going to be right back and find out a little bit more about these details.
Working together to make a better community. We can create a brighter day.
Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guests today are Catherine Boivin-Girard and David Newbury, both who represent injured workers and do community development around these issues.
That's right.
Welcome back, you guys.
Thank you.
So we were just talking about some of the challenges that the workers who come to you for help are facing. And what I'm hearing is that for many workers, the system works fine, but for prolonged and complex injuries, there's way more challenges.
Yes.
How does that play out for the workers that you see?
I mean, the most significant challenge there is that while a worker is in the process of going through the appeals process, they're often without an income. And the appeals process can take, to get to the highest level, can take literally years. Mm-hmm. And people need to find a way to live during this time, to pay their bills. And so the repercussions of that are huge. I mean, in a best case scenario, a worker ends up on disability or on Canada Pension Plan disability, which is a much reduced level of income. And in the worst case scenario, the injured worker ends up with nothing, and we see people losing their homes and families breaking apart and things like that. And the other significant problem with that, in terms of on a public policy front, is that the WSIB is a system that is funded by employers. They pay a percentage of their payroll into a collective pot. And when a worker is denied workers' compensation and ends up on welfare or on disability, then the costs get transferred onto the public, onto the taxpayers, onto the community at large. So we all end up having to chip in and cover costs that really employers should be responsible for covering.
And so, Catherine, do you find anything that might be a little bit different in Northern Ontario in terms of what you're seeing and experiencing?
I think what David said was really, really well said. It's true, when it's a repetitive injury, it's so hard to for the worker to get entitlement right away. So you have to go through appeals, go through medicals. They want a specific diagnosis, and sometimes it's difficult to get a specific diagnosis. So sometimes the WSIB will not pay based on that. It's just a long process. It can be depressing as well for the injured worker to go through that. So they develop depression. And another issue I see too is with a repetitive injury, the worker is scared to file a claim because it's hard to determine when exactly that happened. Mm-hmm. So that's another challenge. And so they'll wait and they're hoping it goes away because they don't really know what the issue is. And then it's past the 6 months deadline, and then more issues arise because of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, there's 250,000 workers who get hurt and put in a claim every year. There's a handful of people available through the community legal clinic system mm-hmm. to help them one-on-one. So part of your jobs is around that community development, law reform, to try mm-hmm. to address some of these bigger issues. Mm-hmm. Catherine, how does that fit into your position servicing all of Northern Ontario, and what are you working on in that area?
Yeah, so with respect to law reform, I'm trying to get OCAL, the Ontario Health...
The Occupational Health Clinics.
That's right.
For Ontario workers.
That's right. Sorry, I just called them OCAL. Yeah.
I know.
There we go. So I'm trying to get them to recognize psychological injuries as well, because right now they just do physical injuries, because now the WSIB does recognize mental stress as an injury. So I'm working in that department for law reform, and I also want to get in contact with the MPP, our local MPP, Gilles Bisson, about the 3 demands of the Workers' Comp is a Right campaign. And I've also been in contact with the Timmins Today, the local media, to talk about those 3 demands as well.
So really trying to raise public awareness in the North
right.
around these issues and expand services.
That's right.
Now, David, you've been involved with this Workers' Compensation is a Right campaign. Tell mm-hmm. us a little bit about that. Sure.
This is a campaign that originated with a group called ONIWIG, the Ontario Network of Injured Worker Groups, which is kind of an umbrella group of injured worker groups from all across the province. And these groups, many of them have been around for a long time, as you know, and as I'm sure you've discussed on air before. But in 2017, there was one of the largest gatherings of injured worker activists in a lot of years. It was in Toronto, and injured worker groups from all over the province came together to try to get on message with each other. And they came up with 3 demands and started strategizing about how to get things out there. And it does always start with public awareness. Those 3 demands are...
yeah, sure. Carry on, please.
The 3 demands are, one of them, Catherine touched on, was stop cutting injured workers' benefits because of what the WSIB is calling pre-existing conditions. And I'll go into a little bit more details about these afterwards, but the second one is to listen to injured workers' doctors, because they're the doctors, they're the people who know the injured worker best. And the last one is a little bit more complicated, but it's the demand to stop a process called deeming. And that's basically where the WSIB pretends that an injured worker has a job that they don't, and cuts their benefits as a result.
So all 3 of these demands sound like they're addressing the issues that both of you face on that individual representation.
That's right.
Yeah, that's the point, right? I mean, Catherine's covering an enormous amount of ground in her job, and our clinic's mandate is also provincial. We both have a larger caseload than it is possible to handle. The demand is higher than the service that we're able to provide. So, I mean, you could run yourself dry trying to help every single person that comes through the door, but eventually you realize that what's happening here is the system is not functioning properly. And so we spend some of our time as well working with injured workers to try to get the system to function the way that it should.
Mm-hmm.
So that first demand you mentioned is listening to, or the second one was listening to the treating physician.
Mm-hmm.
They don't do that now? How does this work?
It depends, I guess. It depends on the caseworker. It's hard, yeah. I mean, if it's an injury that's straightforward, yeah, they'll listen to the family physician. But if it's not a straightforward answer, they might not listen to the family physician, and sometimes they'll listen to their own doctor instead, the WSIB's own doctor, as opposed to the family phisian.
Yeah, they'll often send things away for review by what kind of is colloquially called like a paper doctor. So the files that we're talking about, an injured worker's file just gets sent off to a doctor who works in an office somewhere, who's got a stack of these to get through in a day, and they're just asked a basic question about a personal question about a worker, and it's told, read the medical file and come up with the answer. They never meet with the worker. And those are people who work for private companies that have a financial interest in giving the WSIB the answer that they're looking for. And the WSIB also has internal nurse case managers, and they've got a number of strategies that they use to avoid following the advice or the diagnosis of the injured worker's family doctor.
We're going to have to take another short break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back, and we're going to find out a little bit more about the key demands of the Workers' Compensation is a Right campaign.
Working together to make a better community. We can create a brighter day.
Welcome back to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guests today are David Newbury and Catherine Boivin-Girard, both from out of town here for our Injured Worker Outreach Forum. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
We were just talking about some of the key demands of the Workers' Compensation is a Right campaign. Now, what's this about pre-existing condition? How does that work? Like a person gets hurt and they say what?
Well, there's lots of different ways that they go about it, but the most common thing is to find something that shows up on an X-ray that never caused the injured worker any problems before. Catherine mentioned degenerative disc disease, which is something that happens to everybody's body as we age. Our spines and frankly everything in our bodies, the cells start to die, particularly if you have been doing heavy physical labor all of your life. So let's say there is a construction worker who falls and hurts their back. their back strain is acknowledged. But the WSIB has a chart that says this kind of back strain should resolve in 3 weeks. And if the problem continues beyond that, they'll get an x-ray and they'll say, oh, this wasn't caused by the injury. This is caused by the degeneration that takes place that has taken place in your body through the natural occurrence of aging. I mean,
and 40 years of labor.
And 40 years of being a stonemason, absolutely. But because it's only the specific accident that gets approved by the WSIB, a worker can then, according to the policies that the WSIB writes, a worker can be cut off at that point.
So a worker, if I understand it right, may be still disabled, can't go back to his job. His doctor said, you're still disabled, but the WSIB says, doesn't matter, it's due to something else, you're done.
It's not our problem. Yeah, this is a condition that is unrelated to your work accident, and that's a new thing. And that it used to be these things used to be judged on pre-existing impairments, which is a different. It sounds similar, but it's different from a pre-existing condition. A pre-existing impairment is a condition that caused you to be impaired before your injury. So I mean that had already limited your range of motion, that was causing you pain. And then if an injury aggravated that, then it was considered all to be one, which it is. But a couple of years ago, the WSIB switched to judging things on pre-existing conditions, which can be anything regardless of whether or not it has caused you any problem in the first place.
So the Workers' Compensation is the Right campaign. It has this whole public awareness and kind of law reform agenda. So what's been happening on that level? What happens in communities around this?
We've had really great response from injured worker community, or injured workers all across the province have really responded and taken matters into their own hands on this one. And so we've been collecting petition signatures. We're up to over 4,000 petition signatures. And then injured worker groups have been visiting their MPPs, delivering these petitions, and asking the MPPs to make statements in the legislature. And we've had great luck with that. We've had support from all three parties, believe it or not, who have brought forward the petitions of their constituents. We've had, I know yesterday, for example, a group of injured workers was at Queen's Park and met with 40 MPPs.
40 different MPPs in one day.
Went to 40 offices anyway. And so there were some meetings on the spot, some meetings set up in the future. But we're just kind of pounding the pavement and letting people know that, essentially that workers' comp is a right, both in the political realm and in the public realm. We had some outreach blitzes, as we say, showed up at the various Labor Day parades, and handed out a lot of pamphlets at subway stations and busy intersections around the province.
So previously on the show, we've had guests that have talked about the cutbacks that have happened at the WSIB really since 2010. And the overall reduction in benefits pretty much cut in half in terms of the global amount the WSIB spends helping injured workers since 2010. So what impact has this campaign and the lobby efforts and the law reform efforts that both of you work on along with injured workers, what are some of the gains that have come out of those efforts? Catherine, you were talking about the new entitlement for some psychological conditions.
That's right. Right. So right now, like I said, I'm trying to get OCAL, I'll just call it OCAL, to try and recognize those injuries, because a lot of the times the injured worker is denied that right away because it's hard to prove, right? Psychological injury, you can't see it, right? So we definitely need some treating physicians or people that work for OCAL that specialize in psychological issues to do competent reports or analyze the file. So OCAL, what they do is they'll read the entire WSIB file, they'll read the entire medicals, and they'll say in the end, okay, yeah, that injury or psychological injury was likely caused by a work-related incident. Right.
but the coverage for psychological injuries was expanded within the last couple of years. And there's been some other big victories. This year is the first year in quite a while. You'd probably know more exactly how long that injured workers will be receiving a full cost of living increase, which is essentially just a tiny raise in their
Keeping up with inflation.
keeping up with inflation, the way that likely their employment would have if they were able to continue to work. There's, I think one of the biggest gains is really the fact that it's provided an opportunity for localized injured worker groups to kind of tap into the movement as it exists in the province as a whole. So, on paper, it's just kind of getting a bunch of people on message, but practically speaking, it means that, if another attack on workers' compensation is coming, that there is a stronger province-wide organization that is prepared with its set of demands to take it to their politicians, to take it to their communities, to take it to the media, to take it to the streets. And people who are interested in checking these things out or participating can go to injuredworkersonline.org, and there's what's called an action toolkit there, which provides a guide on how to meet with your MPP, on how to approach the media, and has kind of all of the information you need about the Workers' Comp is the Right campaign.
In the last 15 seconds, Catherine, what are your plans around that community development and law reform?
Well, I'd like to focus more on the three demands. Just get it more out there, not just Timmins. Going to different clinics, talking about the three demands, talking to the local media, social media. We also have an Advocacy North Facebook page if you want to like us on Facebook. Lots of interesting articles as well on injured workers. So please like us.
And for people to get in touch with you further, Catherine, how do they do that?
They can email me at gerardc@lao.on.ca.
We're out of time. Thank you both so much for coming on the show.
Thank
we
you
sure
very much.
appreciate it. And stay tuned and keep safe until we see you next time.
Working together to make a better community. We can create a brighter day.